It seemed like as good a title as anything for this really weird scripture passage. I don't like the Jesus in this passage. I don't know about the rest of you guys, but what's this about? What's this about? This is one of the times when many of the biblical scholars look at a passage like this and say, I don't think it's so much a metaphor. I think it's more an allegory. Do y'all remember allegory from junior high? What's an allegory? It's when you have like things like faith, hope, and charity become characters in some little story. But I think the best we can do with this one is try to figure out, if we go with that, I guess the allegory is about being prepared for you Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts. How many Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts? Look at that. So being prepared. So you know that. But I don't really think that's what we want to focus on today. Cindy asked me when she was reading if she could wear her name tag Jessa because this was the story about a bride. And I said, what's really interesting is it's not. It's about bridegroom and bridesmaids, but no bride. And it's a weird story. Who ever heard of getting married at midnight? Or whatever time it was, they all fell asleep after. And who ever heard of the groom being late? Isn't that the bride's choice to be late, not the groom's? I mean, this is just really doesn't work on a whole lot of levels for us. But anyway, the other piece of today about being prepared is those folks that sit among us who were prepared and chose to be prepared and chose to answer the call to military service. And so I want to do this a little bit of an aside and talk about our military folk for just a minute. Actually, no more than a minute. I would think that all of our military folk here are retired, and so I want to share the story with another retired military person. His name was Charlie, and he was a new greeter at Walmart. You all seen those greeters? Weren't they fun? But he never could seem to get to work on time, and he was 5 or 10 or 15 minutes late every day, but he was a really good worker. He was tidy, of course, sharp-minded, and a real credit to the company. Nonetheless, his boss called him in for a talk, and he said, Charlie, I have to tell you, I like your work ethic. You do a bang-up job when you finally get here, but your being late so often is really becoming bothersome. Charlie says, yes, I know. I'm working on it. He says, well, good. That's what I like to hear. Yes, sir, I understand your concern, and I will try hard. Doesn't that sound like a military answer? Puzzled, the manager went on, I know you're retired from the armed forces. What did they say to you there when you showed up in the morning so late and so often? And Charlie looked down at the floor and then said, well, they usually just saluted and said, good morning, Admiral. Can I get your coffee for you, sir? So good morning, Admirals. There's another story that I found a couple of years ago, and I can't remember if I ever shared it with you. It's a story about Martha Raye. And it's a story from the 60s in the Vietnam War. And it was just before Thanksgiving in '67, and they were ferrying the dead and wounded from a large GRF. I have no idea what that means. Does anybody know a GRF?
GRF, General Receiving Facility.
Okay, whatever that is. Okay, sadly, they had run out of body bags by noon, so the Chinook was pretty rough in the back. All of a sudden, we heard a tape-charged woman's voice. There was Martha Raye with the Special Forces beret and jungle fatigues, helping the wounded into the Chinook and carrying the dead aboard. We took off, short of fuel, and headed to the USAF hospital pad. And as we started unloading, a smart mouth, actually it was a different word used there, Air Force captain said to Martha, Ms. Raye, with all these dead and wounded to process, there won't be time for your show. She pulled down her right collar and said, Captain, see this eagle? I am a full bird colonel in the U.S. Army Reserve. And this is a caduceus, is that how we say that? Caduceus. Caduceus, which means I am a nurse with a surgical specialty. Now take me to the wounded. Martha Raye is the only woman buried in the Special Forces Cemetery at Fort Bragg. And the last story I want to share with you about veterans is one that I think I have shared before, but I just want to remind us of what service means to some people. And it's about the guards who guard the tomb of the unknowns in Arlington. Did you know that for the first 6 months of duty, a guard cannot talk to anyone or watch any television? All the off-duty time is spent studying the 175 notable people laid to rest in Arlington National Cemetery. A guard must memorize who they are and where they are buried. They must commit 2 years of life to guard the tomb, live in a barracks under the tomb, and they cannot drink any alcohol on or off duty for the rest of their lives. They cannot swear in public for the rest of their lives, and they cannot disgrace the uniform or the tomb in any way. After 2 years, the guards are given a wreath pin that is worn on their lapel, signifying they served as a guard at the tomb. There are only 400 pins presently worn. The guards must obey these rules for the rest of their lives or give up the wreath pin. In 2003, as Hurricane Isabel was approaching Washington, the U.S. Senate and House took 2 days off in anticipation of the storm. The ABC Evening News reported that because of the danger from the hurricane, the military members assigned the duty of guarding the tomb of the unknown soldier were granted permission to suspend their assignment. They respectfully declined. Soaked to the skin, marching in the pelting rain of a tropical storm, they said that guarding the tomb was not just an assignment, it was the highest honor that can be afforded a service person. I'm pretty sure they weren't the bridesmaids that forgot their extra oil. I'm pretty sure they had all the batteries they needed for their flashlights. And I'm pretty sure, actually I'm absolutely certain, that God could care less if either of those things were true. There are those among us who have chosen to share part of their lives in a way that the rest of us haven't, that served all of us so that we could sing today, this land is our land, all of our land. That we could have the freedom of speech to whine or to celebrate on Facebook this week on Wednesday morning. That we can stand and sit here in worship together, where no one can come in and close our doors and turn off our lights and tell us we can't worship. To them, we owe our gratitude in this month of gratitude to the people who served so that all of our freedoms help us keep them intact. So how do we go from there to this weird little parable about being prepared and unprepared, or about something totally different than that? Some of the scholars who study this gospel that we name Matthew's, we're not exactly sure who the author of Matthew's is, have done extensive research where they talk about how this gospel came into being. And so, for example, we know that there was nobody running around with a tape recorder or a camera or even a notebook taking notes on what Jesus was saying. That whoever these persons were that put together these writings were writing from memory. And the best we've discerned is that this was probably written, this gospel, according to Matthew, was probably written some 30 years after Jesus died and was resurrected and ascended. So it's people writing from memory. The scholars also believe that at the time, some 30 years after Jesus died, the enthusiasm in the group of followers of Matthew was probably flagging because they literally believed that Jesus' second coming was immediate. That's what they believed in the first century. And there are probably those out there today that believe it's imminent as well. I'm not sure who they are. But, and so the scholars believe that Matthew may have written passages like this into the gospel to sort of bolster people's, not just their patience, but their resolve almost to get them back into line about, hey, we need to be about the work of this Jesus, this Christ of ours, despite the fact that even though we thought he was coming 30 years ago, he's not here yet. So some of the commentators are of the opinion that that's why this kind of crept into the gospel, because quite honestly, I have to agree with those who say it doesn't seem to be like the rest of the Gospels. It doesn't seem to be as if this is what Jesus would have said. Because when you read it, it's about some are excluded and some are included. Some can't come in. Did you ever hear of a wedding where you got there late and they said, sorry, you can't come in? We're having a party, but sorry, you weren't here before we closed the door. You can't come in. And so you kind of look at this passage and you're like, what do we do with this passage? What's it really about? And people believe that, and they're scholars, and they're much smarter than I am. Okay? There are people like Greg Carey. There are people like Russell Rathburn. He's the one who says, this author communicates a message that seems contrary to the heart of the Gospels. Sharon Blizzard asks, is there a time to keep what is ours and not share it? Doesn't that seem not the gospel message that Jesus has told us and lived? She also asks, is there a future judgment of who is in and who is out? It's not what we believe. It's actually a word for that kind of thinking, and it's called apocalyptic. The notion that some people believe that there are those who will be allowed into heaven and those who will be kept out of heaven. There are some among us today who believe that. Some of us fairly recently heard somebody speak that way. And quoted from different passages from the Hebrew Scripture as well as from the Christian Scripture, telling people in attendance at what was to be a happy homegoing, a celebration of a homegoing, telling people, but you're not going to be there. But you're not going to be there. No, you and you and you and you and you won't be there. I don't really think that's what Jesus' message is. A God who believes in hellfire and brimstone. Now, Matthew likes to write about weeping and gnashing of teeth. Actually, Matthew writes about that 6 more times than anybody else does. It's not a big concept in Scripture. And when we talk about the notion of Gehenna, and Steve's is better, and maybe he'll talk more about this when he preaches. It's a notion of being excluded from the community and choosing not to be part of the community. Is that close, Steve? And so it's not the notion of you've been condemned to fire and brimstone, but that you've made some choices that have removed yourself from the community. And what we read of the God of ours, who is the God of the Hebrew Scripture and the Christian Scripture, is, you're my people. You're my people. And whatever has taken you away from remembering that and from living that, that's what I want to get rid of, not you. Not you. You are a child of mine. You are a person that I created in my image and likeness. And I'm never letting anybody take you from me. It's a very different message. that we read elsewhere other than this passage? Maybe the passage is supposed to be teaching us something about waiting. Because the one thing all the bridesmaids have in common is they're all waiting. They're waiting for the bridegroom. They have that in common. The other thing they have in common is they all fall asleep. It's kind of like coming to church and listening to Steve. No, I mean listening to me. They all fall asleep. Here's the people I'm wondering about. The ones who say, no, you can't have any of my oil. I brought it for me. I'm getting into this party with or without you. Those are the people I wonder where their hearts are. But waiting is hard. Waiting is difficult. Sometimes we're waiting to hear about a job. Sometimes we're waiting to hear what our court system will say. Sometimes we're waiting to hear what our doctors and medical team will say. Sometimes that's happening to us, and sometimes that's happening to people we love. But either way, the waiting isn't easy. The waiting isn't easy. I have a lot of cancer survivors in here. What was that wait like from the time somebody said, oh, I'm concerned you may have cancer, to the time it was confirmed and then the treatment began? Or any other illness. We do a lot of waiting. We ask each other, can you wait a minute? But the hardest waiting is when we're waiting to hear something really significant and we don't know what the answer will be. Will you marry me? And you wait. Will you be my beloved? Will you be with me in sickness and health? Will you be with me when everything's going well and everything's pretty much in the crapper? Will you be with me when I've got a couple bucks in my pocket, when I'm asking for the last in your pocket? Sometimes I think the hardest waiting is the waiting God does for us. Will you come back to me? Will whatever is keeping us apart, whether that's an internal thing or an external challenge, will you come back to me? Because I love you more than you can believe. Sometimes I think that's what we need to be pondering. Because I don't know if we even ever get how much we're loved. I don't know if we ever really get it. Last week, I think it was last week, I said, there's nothing we can do to make God love us less. Other pastors won't tell you that. They have, 2 weeks ago, they have a checklist. You must say this and this and this and this and this in life. You must do this and this and this and this and this in life. And God's got this big ledger that God keeps to decide whether or not you're in the in-group or the other group. Were you taught that as a little kid? I was. You got a little gold star for some things and a little nasty check mark for other things, or whatever it was. Right? And then your parents carried it over and used it for toilet training. Boy, that was just really confusing when they did that. Churches have said, you must say this and this and this and this to be a member. You must do this and this and this and this to come in these doors. You must say and do all this stuff to stay here. But never does God say that to us. We are God's beloved, no matter what we do. I don't have any children, but people who have children may be closer to that analogy than the rest of us. There's nothing you can say or do to make me stop loving you. There's nothing you can say or do to make me love you more. I can't love you any more than I do. Might be tough love, but I love you. If we bought into the notion of kind of the apocalyptic themes of some people's thinking around passages like this, then there's always going to be an in-group and an out-group. There's always going to be those who are included and those who are excluded. There are always going to be those who are accepted and those who are rejected. If we listen to the God of our hearts, if we listen to the Jesus that we know, to the God who calls us each and every day, in every single moment, even during our distractions, even during the most mundane tasks we are doing. How many people besides Jackie like to wash dishes? Yeah, like to wash, I know Jackie does, like to wash dishes. Do you pray while you're washing? No? Randy, you don't pray while you're washing? Sometimes during those kind of grounding exercises, whether it's that or pulling weeds or washing the floor, whatever it is you do, doesn't your mind go someplace other than at the weed or at the fork that's in your hand? Doesn't it go to something else, or are you just totally focused on that silverware? That's pretty amazing. I remember once I was I was cleaning silverware in a convent on a Friday night, and I was 20-something years old. And I remember thinking, God, I think there's more to my calling than this. Somehow I think this isn't the totality of what you're asking me to use my gifts to do in life. But in every moment of our existence, if you could stop, no matter what's happening, no matter how somebody else is making you feel, and hear Spirit say to you, at this time, whether you feel most loving and lovable or the least loving and lovable, whether you're excited or whether you're angry, whether you're biting your tongue and your lip and everything else you could to not be dishonorable or disrespectful to another's thinking, to get during every moment, we're just hugged by God in a way we can't reciprocate, in a way we can try to emulate, but we can't even emulate it as well as we'd like to. That's what I think this passage is about. And I gotta say, if it's about knowing whether your flashlight has batteries or not, I can say this with certainty. I don't even know where the heck the flashlight is. And I'm pretty sure God's not going to say, when I knock on the pearly gate, where's your flashlight? And does it have batteries? I really think God's going to say, welcome home. You are my beloved. Amen.